Week 9 is here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. We got a lot of teams on bye this week, but we still have a really good DFS slate to talk about today. All coming up next. Happy Friday morning, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by No House Advantage. We are the Friday DFS version. I am Scott Jenstad, joined as always on Friday mornings by Ryan Belongia. If you guys could please rate and review the podcast, we do appreciate that. It goes a long way towards helping people find us. Hope if you have had some good luck or we gave you some good picks, go ahead and leave us a lot of stars. That would be very, very welcome. Ryan, we're in week 9, pretty much halfway point of the NFL season. I feel like week 8 was one of those weird weeks when everybody that was popular did really well. There were some super crazy high scores last week.
Yep. The chalk smashed again. It's been like that for a few weeks now, especially last week, though. Yeah, Pollard, Kamara, all the running backs went off. Tyreek Hill went crazy. The Dolphins chalk all smashed. For cash, it was interesting. I mentioned that I was going to play Ellinger, and I was high on my chances because of Ellinger. Well, he scored 8 and Tua scored 32, and my cash game lineups cashed most of them without a problem. So
I went Ellinger too, and my cash lineup was easily my best lineup. It was
right.
I hit a lot right. I had some AJ Brown in there too, which is really good. My problem is I ruined lineups with Derek Carr and Devontae Adams, who were absolute zeros. And I say zeros as exaggeration, but not far off. Adams had one catch for the first time. They didn't have multiple catches in 2015. So when everybody does really well, the scores are high, and you hit a 0 at quarterback and your expensive receiver, it's tough to come back from that. So that was big. I had some good teams, but that was a big mistake for me last week. Oh, looks like we lost Ryan for a second there. He will be back soon. So yeah, week 8 was an interesting one where everybody had Pollard, everybody had Kamara, Kenneth Walker scored. Both Miami receivers did well. So it was one of those weeks where everybody that's popular did well. Tua went off. So it was this is an interesting slate this week in week 9, though. We have a lot of games that are not super high over unders, but decently high. We've got 5 games that are between 47 and 50, and then a bunch of games that are low. But without one sticking out, there's nothing that's like a 52, 50, 53 kind of game. It's interesting to. Ryan is back there. Ryan, are you back now? Oh, he's still frozen. It looks like. Sorry about that. Sorry about the technical difficulties here, folks. But anyway, so yeah, it's a week where there's a number of games that are really really interesting to target. We got 5 games, like I said, between 47 and 50, and then so nothing sticks out, but we have a lot of games that are very attackable. So you take an overall look at the slate. There are 10 games on the slate. There's a lot of buys this week, so we've got 10 games on the slate. We've got 8 early, 2 late, and then we have the 3 primetime games. So interesting. There's only 2 games late. So if you're planning some apple picking or something fall like on your afternoon, it might be a good time to do it with only 2 late games. Although one of them is Seattle, Arizona, which should be a really fun game. But on the primetime slate, we've got Philly and Houston was last night. Philly won 29-17. We've got Tennessee and Kansas City on Sunday night, and the Ravens and Saints on Monday night. So those games will be off the slate for us here. I mentioned it's a bit of buy-mageddon this week. We've got 6 teams that are on a bye. We've got the Cleveland Browns, the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants, the Steelers, the 49ers, and I think the Browns. I didn't say Browns, Cowboys, Broncos, Giants, Steelers, 49ers all on bye. So we got 6 teams on bye this week, which brings us to the 10-game slate. Ryan, you are back now?
Yeah, sorry about that. I think that's like 3 weeks in a row now, but I think I fixed it. My bad.
No worries at all. I was kind of describing the slate in general. We've got 10 games, 8 early, 2 late. I said if you want to do some apple picking, this might be a good weekend as there's only 2 games on the late slate. Talked about the primetime games, talked about the teams on bye. I mentioned quickly that there's no game that sticks out in terms of a total. There's no like 53, 54, but there are 5 games between 47 and 50. So we have a number of games that are projected to be pretty highly scoring, and and a bunch of them. So it makes it a really fun slate. There's no like obvious game to target. The games that I'm mentioning on those high totals, we've got the Chargers and Falcons are 49.5. So is Seattle and Arizona. So is the Packers and Lions, 49.5 there too. Raiders, Jaguars is 48, and Bills, Jets is 47. Obviously, some of those, there's some different spreads in there. 4 of those games are pretty close spreads. The Bills and Jets obviously is not. That's a double-digit spread. But with 5 games up here, it's a lot for us to target this week. Are there 5 games that you're like, that's the one I'm going to, this is what I'm starting with, or is it kind of like you're kind of building a meld between those games?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's not obvious this week. We have sort of these 5 games, and at least for me, there's not one that, jumps off the page. I think the Seattle-Arizona game will be relatively popular. It was a few weeks ago when these two teams played, and that game ended 19-9. Like pretty much everybody busted. I mentioned that it was a tad unlucky that game busted. I believe 8 drives got inside the 25, and 5 of them ended with field goals and 3 turnovers inside the red zone.
Wow.
And those teams play faster than most of the other teams on this slate. Arizona leads the league in no huddle rate, and so that game just projects to be, I guess, the fastest pace. I think it'll draw some people. You mentioned then the Lions and Packers. That's interesting. The Lions have been such a great team to target. They were again last week. The Packers have been pretty bad, though, and the Packers play slow, especially when they get a lead. And then also you look at the teams in that game. Who do you want to play really? Or the stacking is tough with both of those teams. Then the Bills. The Bills is an interesting one. Highest implied total, but they're huge favorites. So normally like a spot, I don't know, maybe to avoid, but I think it's more appealing on this slate when there isn't such an obvious target. If the Bills go off, that could be enough for you. I think my favorite game right now is probably the Chargers. The Chargers-Atlanta game. I think, Mike Williams is out, and it looks like Keenan Allen is out. And so in that game, you got some cheap prices on the other Chargers pass catchers. You also have Austin Eckler, who is sort of by far the best running back on the slate, at least projection-wise, and especially with those 2 receivers out. You also have 2 of the better tight ends on the slate in that game. So I kind of like that game. And, the Atlanta, we talk about Atlanta and that they like to slow it down and they like to run, but they've allowed 35 plus points in back-to-back weeks, and their games have featured some huge scores. So I don't mind targeting that one. Do you have a favorite out of these games?
I really don't. To me, it was more kind of, figuring out and picking my spots, but Packers Lions is fascinating. You mentioned it because the Lions play no defense, but the Packers offense has been really slow and really tough to figure out. Just, not good overall. Aaron Jones looked good last week, and we'll talk about him for sure. But it's hard to figure out. Do you trust Rodgers enough here? And is there someone that you want to stack him with? I mean, Alan Lazard's going to be back this week. It sounds like, Romeo Doubs was involved last week. It's hard to figure out, what is stacked there. And then Raiders Jaguars, you didn't really mention. That's 48. I fully just don't trust Derek Carr right now. Like after last week, I get it. Devontae Adams apparently had the flu, but Carr looked horrible. I mean, that offense, that's about as big as a no-show as we've seen all year. I mean, the Saints defense, is okay, but it hasn't been, vintage Saints D. And they got shut out. They didn't pass the 50-yard line till late in the fourth quarter when the backup quarterback was in. It was brutal to watch. They never even got close to scoring. It wasn't like, like you mentioned before with the Seahawks Cardinals, like maybe they were driving and turned it over or driving and missed a field goal. They didn't move the ball the entire game.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. That's sort of why I glossed over that game.
Yeah.
I can't stack the Raiders after that. Jacksonville, when we talk about running backs, we'll mention Travis Etienne. It looks like one of the better plays on the slate. And Jacksonville have maybe some pass catchers that you could target as well. Trevor Lawrence is cheap. But, I'm just not excited about that Raiders side.
Yeah, it's ugly. And in Jacksonville's you can kind of think maybe it's a Trevor Lawrence week with the Raiders defense being not very good, but Lawrence looked horrible last week. It was against Denver, and he looked good the week before, but he's been very up and down. So A lot of these games I like some pieces of, but in terms of stacking, I'm actually thinking about stacking some of the games that aren't in this group right now. So that's going to be
me too.
So I want to. Well, as we talk about that, we'll get to that. But let's get into this slate. I think it's a really fun slate to talk about. I like that there's no obvious game to stack. It kind of gives you a chance to really explore a bunch of options. But first, a note from our sponsors at NFL All Day. NFL All Day is the official licensed digital collectible of the NFL. It's a whole new way to express your fandom by owning the greatest moments for your favorite players and teams. Each moment on NFL All Day features a limited edition video highlight of one of the greatest plays from the NFL's past or present. From OBJ's iconic one-handed catch to Patrick Mahomes' 5 touchdown and 5 straight possessions to Brian Urlacher's 85-yard pick six against the Packers. Sorry, Ryan, I promise I did not put that in the copy myself. There's truly a moment on NFL All Day for every fan. It doesn't stop at being able to own a collectible of your favorite moments, because NFL All Day rewards collectors for their fandom. You see, NFL All Day collectors have earned once-in-a-lifetime experiences like literally going on stage at the draft to announce draft picks and meeting some of the biggest names for the 2022 NFL Draft at the NFLPA Rookie Premiere. What's the best way to get started? Head to NFLAllDay.com to sign up and redeem a free, limited edition NFL collectible featuring Patrick Mahomes. Don't miss out on NFL All Day's next-generation fan platform and start unlocking rewards and experiences today. So, Ryan, it's an interesting week in terms of, we always start by talking about, who's going to be popular, who's going to be chalky, who's going to be cash lamps. And last week it was like, all right, well, Tony Pollard's going to be, 1,000% owned. In terms of this week, it feels like there's a ton of running back value in the 6,000s. There's a lot of options in there. Do you see anybody at quarterback that you think is going to be kind of a chalk, boring play? I'm curious who you're going to come up with here, because I didn't really have an obvious one, but there's a guy in here I want to talk about real quick too. I want to see who you have.
Yeah, I don't actually. It's one of those weird weeks where at least as of now, I don't see anyone that's going to be like the chalk in cash games at quarterback. So we have Josh Allen. You'd like to play Josh Allen, but he's the most expensive he's been this season, and it doesn't look like we're going to get cheap value that makes it doable. So after that, Kyler Murray, I don't know, you're probably not going to go there. So you're going to look at some of these cheap guys. Aaron Rodgers and Geno Smith project well. I think people will go with one of those two. I mean, they're in high total games and just pretty good spots. Yeah. But I think you could even look below that. Trevor Lawrence projects well, but I wouldn't go there. I'm interested in Mariota and Fields, one of those rushing quarterbacks. I don't know. I think it might be a week to pay down. There's, you can't get to Allen, as I mentioned. There's no cheap value, and both of these guys, Fields and Mariota, are in pretty good spots and pretty cheap, and you like that rushing upside.
So Fields was the guy that I wanted to talk about. It's an interesting spot in terms of the fact that it's not one of the super high total games. The total's 45.5 though in the game Miami. It's not a bad one, in Miami. We know can put up points. They did it last week against Detroit, but Fields is 20 plus fantasy points the last 3 weeks, 25 each of the last 2 weeks. He got 60 plus rush yards in 3 straight weeks. Like, they have clearly changed the offense the last few weeks, and they're letting him. It's not like scramble plays; it's actually designed run plays. He's been a QB1, so one of the top 12 QBs in 4 straight weeks. All of that with passing 200 passing yards once all season. It's pretty wild setup. The Miami D pass D is not good. They added Bradley Chubb this week, so maybe that'll help the pass rush. But Fields is fascinating to me. He's 5,300. He's not one of the higher games, but he's a guy that you could play. It's hard to stack with him, because they don't throw the ball a ton. But you could play him by himself in a cash lineup. You could play Darnell Mooney. You could take a risk on Chase Claypool, maybe coming over for his first game. But I find Fields really fascinating. I don't think he's going to be the highest owned, but I think you're right. I think you mentioned 5 or 6 guys. We'll talk about them. We talk about our favorite stacks, but it's a week where it's really spread out in terms of quarterbacks.
Yeah, I'm glad you're on board with Fields, because that's who's in my lineup right now. Nice. And and I think for cash games, you just play him by himself. There's no reason to pair him with anybody. But it's interesting, and it's a tough decision you mentioned, because that's one of the lower total games. So it affects his projection, at least in the 2 places I've looked. Marcus Mariota has a little bit higher projection, and even Trevor Lawrence has a little bit of higher projection. So people look at that stuff, and some follow it religiously for cash games. This is one where I would side with Fields. I'm confident enough. You mentioned his last 2 games. He's looked better. For me, he's passed the eye test. For me, he's a better running quarterback than Mariota. I don't know. I think he has more upside, and I like the whole matchup. I don't know. I guess I'm more confident in Fields, so I'm fine doing that in cash games.
Yeah, I like it too. In terms of running backs, I mentioned there's a lot of running back, I don't know if we call it value or guys that are interesting in the 6,000s. We got, ATN, you mentioned 6,300. Kenneth Walker, 6,200, I believe. Ramondre Stevens, 6,200. Like all these guys will be kind of fairly popular, but nobody sticks out as like, oh, this is the guy you have to play this week. There's no like Tony Pollard from last week, but ATN, Stevenson, you got Joe Mixon here, 6,500, way priced down against big home favorite against Carolina, although Mixon looked really bad on Monday night, but the whole Bengals offense did. But you've got just like 4 or 5 guys in this range. You could even throw, Dante Foreman in here at 6,000. There's a lot of guys in this range, but I think the fact there's a lot of them kind of spreads out the roster. I don't think there's like an obvious, everybody's going to kind of start with this guy this week. Do you see that?
Yeah, all those guys you mentioned, they all project well. They're all in the similar salary range. If one stands out, it is Etienne. He's been so good since taking over. He just, shredded the Broncos, 156 yards. And, I think people will look at that matchup at home against the Raiders and be pretty confident. So I think he'll probably be the most popular. After that, then it's up in the air. You mentioned Mixon's in a good spot. And Mixon, the thing with Mixon, he hasn't looked great, but his salary is the cheapest it's been all season. So that will make him relatively popular. I kind of like Aaron Jones. If you go up a little bit higher, Aaron Jones too, I think is in the conversation. But just to echo what you said, no one really stands out after that.
And at wide receiver, there's a lot of guys I like, but it kind of feels the same. The one I would say that maybe stands out if things work out and Keenan Allen doesn't play is Josh Palmer in Los Angeles with the Chargers at 5,100. I actually thought it'd be a little cheaper. They bumped him up a little, probably knowing there's some injury issues there, but 5,100 for Palmer, with attached to Herbert. If both, obviously Williams is out, but I think Keenan Allen's going to be out. We don't know for sure yet, but it's kind of trending that way. If 1 and 2 are out and 3 becomes 1, I think Palmer at 5,100 becomes pretty popular pretty quickly.
Yep, I agree. Palmer, I think, would be the most popular if Keenan was out. Seems like Keenan's going to be out. After that, it's wide open. I think up top, the two that project the best are Tyreek Hill and DeAndre Hopkins. So if people have the salary, they might look there. There's a couple guys in the mid-range too. Godwin stands out a little to me. He's still a little bit cheap. 11 targets, 13 targets, 12 targets. And you have in this matchup the likelihood that Jalen Ramsey will be on Mike Evans at least most of the time. So it's a little bump to Godwin there. So I think people look there, and then the Seahawks receivers are in that range too. Metcalf and Lockett, they're okay. DJ Moore, he's got the hot hand right now, still pretty cheap. But nothing really stands out other than Palmer if Keenan Allen were to sit.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I love Godwin this week. Easy, my favorite play at 6,200. We'll talk about receivers when we get there. But he stuck out to me. I didn't know if he'd stick out in terms of like a huge chalk play. I think he'd be pretty popular. But I like that it's there's a lot of spread out, and there's a lot of guys in the 8,000. So I think that you're right. I think Hopkins and Tyreek stick out a little bit, but. You got Justin Jefferson's right there. Stephon Diggs is right there. Cooper Kupp's a little higher, but they're all in the same mix. They're all going to take some percentage points away from each other. But let's jump right in. Let's jump into some game stacks. So what are you doing at quarterback here? You mentioned Fields got kind of naked in a cash game setup, but if you're looking for game stacks, who to play, your quarterback, receiver, maybe come back with somebody else, what are you kind of thinking in that regard? What's your favorite one there?
I'm not so sure I have a favorite at the moment.
It's that kind of week, which is good. I like it.
I like it a lot. Yeah. You got to think a little, get a little creative. We've had these no-brainer plays for the past few weeks, and they've all just been crushing. It's not like that this week. I mentioned at the start, I'll have some Justin Herbert. I'll give it a try again with the Chargers. It hasn't really worked yet this season. I mean, we've had these spots before, but. So I will stack the Chargers and run it back with Kyle Pitts. Tight end this week is probably
Kyle Pitts, the mention of the first 20 minutes of the podcast. How things have changed.
Yeah, and Kyle Pitts was actually on all my best lineups last week too.
Nice.
I took the chance last week. He was like 4 or 5% owned in some of the stuff I played. But yeah, anyways, on this slate, tight end is, I think, the weakest I can remember it. I mean, you have Zach Ertz as the most expensive and Hockenson right below that for a new team. And then just not much. So, you can kind of do whatever you want this week at tight end. You get a 20-point score from somebody, you might crush the field. But anyways, besides that Chargers game, yeah, okay. So I'm thinking of the Bills, but I guess I got Justin Fields. I mean, we just spoke about him, but that was for cash games. For tournaments, yeah, I'm still going to play Fields. And I think I'll take the chance with Mooney, and you can run it back with Tyreek Hill. It just has to be an easy stack or a single stack. Just you don't want to pair Fields with more than one pass catcher. I don't think so. Some of the reason you roster him is for the rushing, and I don't know if you really expect him to throw for 300 plus yards and a bunch of touchdowns. So I'll probably pair him with just one guy. And I kind of like Mooney now that they have Claypool there. I think it will make Mooney a little bit less popular, and I don't think it really negatively affects him. If anything, it might help him a little bit. So I'm gonna have some Bears stacks, as funny as that sounds, I guess. And then if I'm gonna target a chalkier game, I might take the chance with Kyler and Hopkins. That just seems like sort of a simple one, and it's another one where I don't like to double stack Kyler. I think it's easy to just pair him with Hopkins rather than guess on these other guys who are now priced up now. I mean, Rondale Moore is a fine option. He had his best game of the season last week. Ertz, I don't know. Ertz is expensive now, and now that they got Hopkins back, I don't think Ertz is as good of a play as he'd been in weeks past. So just give me Kyler, Hopkins, and then probably DK Metcalf or even Kenneth Walker.
I thought Kyler looked the best last year throwing the ball last week that he did all year long. I thought that was I've been unimpressed with Kyler overall. We talked about last time they played Seattle, he was really bad. He was 23 of 37 for 222. Did rush for 100 yards in that game, which kind of built his floor nicely, but no touchdowns in that game. Just killed people who played him, stacked him. It was with I don't remember. It was with Rondale Moore, Hollywood Brown at that point, but. I like that play. I thought he looked good last week. I think that they're a different offense with Hopkins. You hate to think like one receiver makes that much of a difference, but DeAndre really seems like he changed that offense. Kyler seems way more comfortable. He's there. He was 31 of 44 for 326 and 3 touchdowns last week. He didn't have more than 2 touchdowns throwing in a game all year until that one. So I like that play. I'm curious if people will see that last game against Seattle and be like, yeah, I don't want to go back to that. He's not cheap, so it's interesting. But I kind of like the other side of that Chicago game. I think it's very workable. I like stacking Tua again. I think that he was huge against Detroit. Granted, Detroit's bad, but he was 29 for 36, 382 and 3 touchdowns. And what you like with Tua is it's obvious. You either take Tyreek, who's been huge, or you take Jalen Waddle, or you can play both. It gets really expensive fast, but you can play both. But he just has obvious guys he throws to. It's one of those things that he either throws to Tyreek or he throws to Waddle. Tyreek has the most targets in the whole NFL, but Waddle has like 33 more targets than anybody else on Miami. So it's just their passing tree is so narrow. I think it works. You come back with Mooney. He's 4,700, 5 for 70 last week. You mentioned when you were talking about Fields. I think that he's an okay coming back. I don't think you expect him to go off. You mentioned Fields is not the guy that's going to throw for 350, but I think Mooney does enough at 4,700. I think he's a nice comeback there. The Bears have not faced a lot of good quarterbacks. The numbers are pretty good against quarterbacks. They haven't faced a ton, a murderer's row by any means. They have a really bad pressure rate, so I think that Tua will have plenty of time to throw. In terms of sneakier stacks, it's a weird week because this is the week where both Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers are in situations where are they finally going to have a big week? I think I lean a little bit myself towards Brady here at 6,000 against the Rams. The Rams are dead last in the NFL in pressure rate. They are not doing a lot to make the quarterback feel uncomfortable, allowing 7.4 yards per attempt. I just feel like Brady feels really due for a 3-touchdown game. He's got 290 passing yards or more in 4 of his last 5 weeks, but 3 touchdowns total. That's just it's one of those things that just doesn't really compute very well together. He's going to have a game where those guys that get tackled at 3 are going to get in the end zone. I think it's going to be this week. I really like him at 6,000. I like pairing him with Godwin. I think that really works out well. Coming back is tough though. You've got to play way up for Cooper Kupp, or you got to risk Allen Robinson or Tyler Higbee. So coming back is tough in that game, but I do really like Brady and Godwin. I think Godwin gets his first touchdown of the year. Crazy, he hasn't scored yet. But Brady and Godwin this week for a stack with me. I know it's a little bit off the map, not one of those high-score games, but I really like Brady for a 3-touchdown week.
Yeah, no, I like both those calls, actually. And, you mentioned Tua at the start as maybe I don't know. You mentioned maybe not being sneaky, but I think he's actually a sneaky one too, which is funny to say. He's not going to be owned this week after what he did last week and how popular he was and what he's done in some of the prior weeks. So yeah, I think that's a really sharp call. Actually, just everyone's off Tua and the Dolphins all of a sudden on a slate where there really aren't any clear-cut options. It's sort of weird to me. So yeah, I think that's a sharp call.
Yeah, I really like it this week. I know they're not one of the 5 games that are 5 totals, but they're right underneath it. They're 45.5, so they're right there. Question in the chat: Would you drop Kadarius Toney to pick up Wan'Dale Robinson off waivers in a full PPR? That is a tough call right there from Adam Weber, just because they're both kind of the guys that everybody's been picking up. Wan'Dale was a disappointment last week, only 3.5 points. I think I'd rather have Wan'Dale just because of the way that offense is. They need options right now, and Kansas City, you got to work Toney in. I like Toney a lot in that offense, but they have so many weapons. They have Travis Kelce. I think it's going to be hard to time him each week. Probably hit some big plays, but give me Wan'Dale in full PPR. I just think he'll be more involved in the offense. How about you?
Yeah, definitely give me Wan'Dale as well. One other stack. I want to mention it because I'm not going to play it, and it doesn't sound like you are either. But no one's going to play Joe Burrow this week. People are off Cincy, and we've seen Burrow win so many slates for people. I mean, he's done it 5 or 6 times just over the past season and a half. Now, it's not the greatest spot, but I'm just bringing it up because no one's really going to do it. And, I don't know. That to me, that's enough to make it viable.
Yeah, and he's easy playing with Higgins or Boyd. They're going against Carolina this week. You see them going off early. They're probably pretty pissed off. They looked horrible on Monday night. They looked really bad. Only got there a little bit late just because they had a garbage late garbage time touchdown to Higgins, a 40-yard TD. They were kind of guy missed a tackle, but Carolina defense is not one that scares you. The other interesting stack to me, there's just so many this week to pick from, but I think Cousins, Kirk Cousins against Washington, 6,200, pairing him with Jefferson, a really good matchup. Washington's allowing 7.5 yards per attempt. Cousins has not been great stat-wise. He's like under 6. He's like 6.6 yards per attempt, I think I saw. But one of those games, again, he kind of feels due for one of those big games. Washington's defense is not one that scares you. Maybe they can score a little bit to get this going a little bit, but he's interesting. I mean, Goff had 320 yards last week. He's against Green Bay. If Green Bay kind of gets it going, maybe they have to come back. The Packers' pass D has been pretty good, but it's a quarterback in a high-scoring game. He had 321 yards last week. There's so many options this week. Picking the right quarterback is going to be huge because there's like 10 and 11 ways you could go here. We didn't even mention Josh Allen at the top, but 8,500 for Allen. It's an interesting one. He's that big implied total, but the Jets D is pretty good. So it's like that weird in between of, do you want to pay up for him in a not great spot, but he's still Josh Allen, still could go off. There are so many ways to go to quarterback this week.
Yeah, and I think one of the nice thing about this week is you can credibly target any of these spots we mentioned, and that's different in other weeks. Like take last week, for instance. To target another spot, that means you would have to fade Miami or fade Philadelphia or fade Tony Pollard or Kamara, and in the end, those are just going to be mistakes most of the time. And on this slate, you don't really have to worry about that so much. So you can target some of these games that normally you wouldn't be able to if there was just some great spots like there are on other slates.
For sure, I agree. I think it makes it a little bit fun. So let's get into all the other positions. We've got a lot to talk about here, but first, a note from our sponsors at No House Advantage. No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play in pick'em contests versus other people for the shot at winning big cash prizes. Download the app, choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to 5 player prop over-unders or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including the NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Sign up now with promo code NHAWIRE. That's NHAWIRE at nohouseadvantage.com, or download the app on the app stores to get a first deposit match up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined. It's not just how you play, but also where you play. You do not want to miss out on this. So, Ryan, I was looking at the No House Advantage app. We'll talk about a couple player props here. It's fun to kind of break these down. What are a couple of the over-unders this week that you find yourself attacking this week if you're playing on No House Advantage?
Yeah, well, the first one seems relatively simple. We mentioned Josh Palmer at the start. I believe his number was 47.5. Even if Keenan Allen played, I wouldn't necessarily mind having that. But if Keenan Allen's out, like it looks like he might be, the over on Palmer seems really good there. 12 targets last time, 9 catches, only 57 yards, but he's shown upside before. He had 99 yards on 9 targets in week 3. So I think that one's pretty easy if Keenan Allen's out. And then for the other one, I think I'm going to choose DJ Moore, the over on DJ Moore, nice. 58.5. Sort of ride the hot hand with DJ Moore. 11 targets and 10 targets in the past 2 games and some big plays. Everybody saw the big play to almost win the game or force overtime last week. But I think, a lot, so much of it has to do with Christian McCaffrey not being there anymore. And Robbie Anderson's not there anymore. So they just don't have anybody. So he's going to get a ton of targets. He just needs to catch a few of them to get over 58 yards. So give me the over on Moore as well. What about you?
I like those. I mean, they're really feeding DJ the last couple of weeks, and as you mentioned, no McCaffrey has changed that offense a little bit, kind of how they do things, and they're running the ball a lot and then feeding DJ Moore. I'm gonna go a couple overs also. We really kind of lead towards overs. A little more fun to talk about. I'm gonna go Christian Kirk over 56.5 yards. I really like the setup this week for Jacksonville, and I think that number seems really low for me on Kirk. He's been solid, always involved in the offense. I know they struggled last week against Denver, but I like the bounce back against the Raiders this week. I think he goes over that number pretty darn easily, actually. And then I'm gonna go. Kind of go back to the passing stack that I was attacking. I'm going to go Tua Tagovailoa over 1.5 passing touchdowns. I think Tyreek gets in the end zone this week. He has not scored since week 2, I believe it was. He had 2 touchdowns in week 2, has not scored since. So I think Tyreek gets in, maybe Waddle gets in, maybe a little Gesicki. I think that 1.5 passing TDs, I really like the over there. So there's a few of our choices on the No House Advantage app. Again, if you want to check that out, it's nohouseadvantage.com or No House Advantage on your any of your app stores there. It's a fun pick 'em game. A lot of overrunners can make some money, so definitely check that out. Hopefully our 4 picks will help you get started there. So let's talk about running backs, Ryan. The expensive running backs, you mentioned Austin Eckler earlier as the most expensive by far. He's $1,000 more than anybody else on DraftKings. He's $8,800. We have Dalvin Cook at $7,800, Aaron Jones at $74, Josh Jacobs at $73. In terms of expensive running backs here, I have a huge favorite for myself. But who do you like in this range among the running backs that are priced over $7,000?
I have a feeling you might say Aaron Jones. I love Aaron Jones in that matchup against Detroit. But I'll also mention Austin Eckler. I'm curious what you're doing with Eckler this week. He's so expensive, but the targets without Keenan have been insane. Yeah, you hit it. He's so expensive. He's been in 7,500, 7,800, 7,700. Now he's way up there, by far the most expensive he's ever been. But those numbers are insane. And if Keenan Allen's out again, he's going to catch 10 balls again. I mean, he has 28 targets in the past 2 weeks. You look at his fantasy scores. Yeah, they're just crazy. So I actually think the salary too will keep enough people off of him. If he was $8K, he would have been crazy popular. So I'll try to get there. But you're right. The salary makes it tough. I really like Aaron Jones, though. I don't know what you think.
Aaron Jones is one of my favorite plays the whole slate. So yeah, in this range, it's definitely Jones. But going back on Eckler real quick before we get to Jones, the numbers are wild. He'd be a top 20 receiver just on his receiving stats right now. So it's but it's weird. Then you look and he has under 40 yards in rushing in 5 of 7 games. That's wild. That's not even a high. It's a crazy. It's not like he's he's been under 80 yards in 5 of 7. He's been under 40 yards, and then he has a 173 rushing yard game in there. He had that big run that boosted that. But 28 targets you mentioned the last couple weeks, 22 catches, 8 touchdowns the last 4 games too. It's a really hard guy for me to figure out right now. I mean, it's so good, but you have the rushing floor is 4 points. It's not low. And a lot of these guys that we talk about up here, usually they're going to get 18 carries. So, we talk about Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb. at least the touches are there, but they are just different with Eckler. It's the catches. Without Keenan Allen, without Mike Williams, you got to think he's super involved. But it's hard for me to click it at 8,800. He's a tough guy for me. But I love Aaron Jones this week. He looked really good last week. The only part of the Packers offense that did look good. He was 20 for 143. Also had 4 catches. Been playing a lot. He's been playing more than AJ Dillon. The AJ Dillon thing was a big concern with people in the preseason, and that's last couple of weeks. It's been a lot of Aaron Jones. Detroit defense is just terrible. They're allowing 5.25 yards per carry as a 5.25. Per carry. It's like really bad. You got to think that there's a chance that Green Bay gets up in this game and they feed Jones. He's involved in the passing game. I think 7,400 is a really good price week for Jones on your Packers. It sounds like you're on board, and I always lean for you for the Packers expertise.
Yep. I'm on board. I love Jones here. This Packers offense isn't what it used to be. They need Jones. Their best option to be competitive and win games is to feed Jones a lot and to throw him a lot of passes. I mean, you look at the Packers pass catchers, you can't really expect Rodgers to just sling it around like he used to. I think you mentioned that they've been feeding him the last couple weeks. He's been more involved. I think that's what happens again. And it's just such a good matchup. Basically the best matchup in fantasy football, a matchup in Detroit. So I love Jones too this week.
And I like that he did, even if they get up a little bit, he's not game scripted out fully because he'll catch some passes, or if they get behind randomly, he'll catch some passes, which is nice. And if they get ahead, he can obviously, he can run out the clock. But we mentioned all the guys in the 6,000s. We mentioned Aaron Jones. We mentioned Austin Eckler. Does that mean you think that nobody's going to have Dalvin Cook this week at 7,800?
Yeah, I think nobody's going to have Dalvin Cook this week at 7,800.
I do too. It's a good spot though. They're favored against Washington. Washington's allowed 5 yards per carry each of the last 3 games. Or Cook's been over 5 yards per carry each of the last 3 games. Washington has played the run pretty well, but Cook had his first 100-yard rushing game last week. He was 20 for 111, 5 for 30 receiving. It seems like he and this offense are kind of figuring it out right now, and Cook's been really rolling the last few weeks.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he wasn't popular at all last week. I mean, 2-3%, and quite a few pretty sharp people took the chance on Cook last week. And 28 fantasy points. It would have worked on other weeks if all the other running backs didn't go off. But yeah, you have a similar spot this week, like you mentioned. It's a good spot for Cook. He's getting a lot of usage, and no one's going to roster him. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think he's interesting. I just think that it's going to be, if people are going to go up, they're going to go up to Eckler. If they're going to get in that range, they're going to go to Jones. And then otherwise, I think they just go cheap. I mean, we talked about the guys in the 6,000s. We'll kind of break them down a little bit more in depth now. We've got Joe Mixon, 6,500, ATN, 6,300. Ramondre Stevenson, 62, Kenneth Walker, 62, Raheem Mostert, 61, and Dante Foreman, I guess it's Deontay Foreman, 6,000. Foreman, I want to start with. We'll go with the cheapest first. He another big game last week. He was 26 for 118 and 3 touchdowns after a 15 for 118 the week before. Tougher game script here. They're at Cincinnati. I think they're like 7-point underdogs this week, but and it sounds like Chuba Hubbard might play, which kind of complicates it a little more too. They really split a lot of time the week prior. The Bengals have struggled against the run since DJ Reader got hurt though. Like he's the kind of their big run stopper, run gap guy. Are you playing Foreman? Or are you just going ATN and Stevenson? What are you doing in this range? Because I just reeled them off. There's like 6 really good options between 6,000 and 6,500.
Yeah, I don't mind Foreman. Hubbard would have to be out though. I couldn't take a gamble like that if Hubbard was in there. You need Foreman. I mean, I'm not saying he wouldn't, but you need him for 20 plus carries just because he's not really involved in the passing game. But yeah, I don't mind the matchup against Cincinnati. Cincinnati were favorites against Cleveland last week, and Nick Chubb ran all over him. So yeah, I don't see why Foreman can't do that. To answer your question,
Nick Chubb is awesome, by the way.
Yeah, he is. I mean, Chubb runs all over a lot of people. Me too.
Love that guy. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right though. Chubb underrated and underappreciated, I think. Yeah. But yeah, you hit it though. I'm going to be very heavy on Etienne, and then I'll probably sprinkle some of these other guys in. I don't know what's up with Damian Harris. I see he's missed both practices with an illness. He's been questionable with other injuries too. I like Ramondre Stevenson already. If for some reason Harris were to miss, I'd really like Ramondre,
Yeah, I agree there. I think that Stevenson's playable with Harris, but I think without Harris, I think he becomes probably the most rostered in this range. I mean, he just looks really. He has 15 catches the last 2 weeks. Like they're using him a ton in the passing game. He was 16 for 71 last week, 7 catches. They're a home favorite against Indianapolis. The Indy run D is pretty good against running backs, and Shaq Leonard is back. Previously, Darius Leonard, he's back, which changes their whole defense with him and DeForest Buckner in the middle there. They get pretty tough pretty quick. Kenneth Walker, though, at Arizona, 5,200 or 6,200. I feel like people are like a little bit off him now that he was 1851 last week. He did score. It's weird. He's a weird format. He's very boomer bust. He has a ton of carries that don't gain a ton of yards, but then he pops big runs. He has nothing in the pass game, really, so that's a little bit risky too. But Arizona allowed 151 yards and 2 touchdowns to Minnesota last week. We mentioned Dalvin Cook did well last week. Him and Madison together for 151. I feel like Walker was like the belle of the ball 2 weeks ago and last 2 weeks, and now he's a little bit underappreciated with Etienne and Stevenson and Foreman kind of in this range. We mentioned Joe Mixon. Like there's just so many ways you can go here.
Yeah. I don't really have much to add. You hit it on the head. Walker's sort of going to be the forgotten man because of these other guys in this range. So, another reason to roster him. And actually that matchup for Walker has the biggest mismatch between offensive and defensive lines out of any of the other games on the slate. Arizona, their defensive line ranks 30th in the league. I believe they're giving up 4.7 yards a carry or something, averaging over a touchdown a game allowed to opposing running backs. Yeah, you mentioned Cook had a big game against them last week. So yeah, it all makes sense for Walker, and he's not going to be as popular because, as you mentioned, he doesn't have that receiving upside, but he
looks like we may have lost Ryan again there. So that was the end of the 6,000 range at running back. It's a really fun range. It's an interesting range. I think that I'm actually leaning towards Kenneth Walker this week. A little bit under rostered, but I think it really is an interesting spot in terms of everybody's kind of forgetting about him. I like his chance to hit a big play. I like that Arizona gave up so much ground last week to the Minnesota running back. So. Anyway, as Ryan comes back, he's back now. Sorry about the internet issues there. I was kind of hitting that. I think as you went through there, you kind of talked me into a little bit more Kenneth Walker than I anticipated. I think I like the underappreciated, the overlooked angle this week. I think he hits a big run this week against Arizona. I think that game's going to be, you mentioned the 19 to line last time they played. I think it has to be a little more wild this week. So I like getting Walker this week. I think that. If Harris plays, I think I'm going to go Walker over Stevenson as much as I like Stevenson.
Yeah.
What are you doing with Mixon though? We kind of glossed over him a little bit. Are you playing him this week? I know it looked rough last week, but man, the matchup and game script worked really well for Mixon at a really lowered price.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Mixon's always a tough one. I think I kind of feel similarly to you in that. Just not a guy I love rostering. Doesn't look the greatest a lot of times.
These young guys at the same price are just so much more fun and sexier. But I mean, he's gonna get used. He's gonna get involved. It's not very fun to click him over Etienne and Walker and Stevenson.
No, it's not. Am I gonna roster him? Maybe on a small percentage of lineups, but I'm not gonna be heavily invested in Mixon.
Strategy question in the chat. Someone's mentioned they're struggling in their league. They're 3-5, but they do have Saquon and Justin Jefferson. Would you trade one of those and try and do like a 2-for-1 kind of deal? In my mind, I think I keep my studs and try and piece together elsewhere. I think that I don't love 2-for-1 trades where you're giving up the best player. I tend to think you just kind of make yourself more. You give yourself maybe more floor but less upside. I think in a league that you're trying to catch up, you need some huge scores. I'm keeping JJ and Saquon and kind of trying to figure out the rest of the spots.
I'm with you.
So let's jump into before I do that. Is there anybody under 6,000 at running back you're considering playing this week? I did not see anybody under Foreman. Is there anybody that you are strongly thinking about playing?
I don't think so. It would be a gamble, but the one guy I'll mention is AJ Dillon. If you look at the numbers, they don't look great, but it is this matchup against Detroit. So maybe in a larger field tournament, I don't mind it. I don't know. I wouldn't roster him over some of these other guys we mentioned, but maybe in like the flex as a third running back. Maybe.
And Dylan's how much here? I'm scrolling.
5,700.
Okay.
So you just figure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, funny enough, mine is the same price at that I'd consider 6,000. It's actually Devin Singletary in Buffalo, just because they have this big. He doesn't usually get a ton of work, but he had 17 carries 2 weeks ago. He had 14 against Green Bay, and they were effective yards. He was 14 for 67 last week, 17 for 85 in the week against Kansas City before the bye. I just think Singletary's good, and if they get a lead, like maybe they feed him in the third. I know they won't maybe not feed him in the fourth if they're way ahead, but I like. It's a tougher matchup against the Jets, but I think Singletary could be pretty involved. It's one of those weeks where, maybe he happens to get the ball inside the 5 and score 2 touchdowns. I think you're looking at, maybe 15 to 18 touches against with a big positive spread. Could get a good game script. So if I went under 6,000, it's hard to really get there, but my guy would be Singletary.
Yeah, I can see that.
Cool. So let's jump into receivers. But first, a note from our sponsors at Monkey Knife Fight. Football is officially back on Monkey Knife Fight with all the NFL action you're looking for. And if college football is more your speed, we've got plenty of that also. On Monkey Knife Fight, there's no sharks, no salary caps, and no math. It's easy to play, easy to win. Daily fantasy player props. Join now at monkeyknifefight.com and get your first game free. Then use promo code RWNFL to get your first deposit matched instantly up to $100. So what are you waiting for? Join Monkey Knife Fight today. So, Ryan, as we've gone through here, we talked about a lot of the expensive receivers, but there are a bunch of them. We talked about some weeks, this week there's no expensive tight ends. Some weeks there's no expensive running backs. This week, we have only Eckler's over 8,000. But we've got Cooper Kupp's 8,900, Justin Jefferson 8,600, Tyreek Hill 85, Stephon Diggs 84, Devontae Adams 8,100. I'm going to throw DeAndre Hopkins in here just because it works at 7,900. That's what 6 guys between 7,900 and 9,000 to play this week. We mentioned before, you think Tyreek and DeAndre will be the most popular, but who do you like the most in this group?
Yeah, it's tough.
All studs.
All studs, right? All the studs. Probably Tyreek. If I had to pick one, I mean, the numbers are just crazy, and I mentioned that. I might play some Fields. You're going to play some Tua. So, I mean, I'm going to use the expensive receivers as part of my stacks where I can. So I like Tyreek probably the most. And I guess second most would be DeAndre Hopkins. It's nice that Hopkins is cheaper than these other guys. You can kind of, at least for me, I think Hopkins' ceiling is on par with those other guys. You might say slightly less, but on any given Sunday, he can end up the highest scoring receiver. But I think, I'll stick within my stack, basically. If I'm on the Seattle-Arizona game, then it's going to be Hopkins, or else it's going to be Hill. I don't know. Do you have a favorite out of all these guys?
So it's tough, right? The point you made there at the end is like you got to play within your stack. If I play Tua, you got to play Tyreek. It's just the targets are insane. 15, 13, and 14 last 2 weeks. But the guy that I love this week in this range is Justin Jefferson at 8,600. I think he will be nicely under rostered this weekend. Like a lot of people have Tyreek, a lot of people have DeAndre Hopkins. I think that Kupp and Jefferson kind of slide through. You mentioned earlier there's not a ton of easy value this week, so it's hard to get to these guys. If you're not playing Cousins, it's hard to get to Jefferson by himself, but has not scored since week 1, which is just at some point where you'll be like, that's crazy that he had this stretch and he's going to have a 2 or 3 touchdown game. He has 98 plus yards each of the last 4 weeks. So it's not like he is, and it's just not scoring. He's not doing a lot, but at 147, 154, 107, 98 the last 4 weeks. I think we're on the verge of a large Justin Jefferson week. I think it's going to be this week. Washington's been poor against wide receiver ones all season long. I really like Jefferson to score this week, maybe get in the end zone twice, and I think he'll be pretty overlooked because I think it's hard to get to him this week by himself.
Yep, I think that's a great call. You always hit it with these calls. It was similar last week.
Yeah, I gotta actually I gotta actually play him when I talk about it though.
Yeah, though, I can't emphasize enough. It's reason enough to play these guys that they're going to be less popular. It's reason enough.
Like half the roster is Hill right next to him at the same price?
Yep, definitely.
And I mean, obviously I love Tyreek. The targets are insane, but Justin Jefferson is a freaking monster. So
right. In the end, we're still playing we're playing a game, and a game that involves game theory, and rostering a guy like Jefferson is just a great move. Again, you're not making a mistake or going for anything crazy. This is Justin Jefferson in a great spot. He can nuke this slate.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it this week. I loved AJ Brown last week. Ended up not being able to fit him in, which was disappointing because he had 3 touchdowns. I'm gonna play Jefferson this week, and I'm gonna force this Labs to figure out a way to make it work. Because I think it's probably my favorite receiver play with the rostership at the price. I think it's going to be just tough to get to him. We mentioned Hopkins at 700, but in the low 7,000s, we had a few guys. We have Jalen Waddle, finally priced up a little bit, up to 7,400 after the 2 touchdown week. We have T. Higgins as the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati with Jamar Chase being injured. He's 7,300. Mike Evans off the big game last week, 6 for 123, 7,200. Gotta think it's hard for people to play these guys. People are going to go down to 6,000s or go up to Hill and Hopkins. Any of these 3 guys that you really like, you're going to find yourself kind of forcing into a lineup this week.
No, but can I say Gabe Davis?
For sure. He's 6,900. So you're sneaking right underneath that range. Yeah, go for it, Davis.
I'll say Gabe Davis just because, I think it's going to be a forgotten range. And I don't think people are going to play Gabe Davis unless they play Josh Allen. And even those who play Josh Allen won't play Gabe Davis. So if I'm going to use a cheap quarterback like Fields, maybe I'll be able to get a weird one-off like Davis at 5%, and then he catches a couple touchdowns and 150 yards. I'm considering Davis out of those guys. What about you? Yeah, that low 7K range, I guess. Were you going to roster any of these guys?
It's an interesting range because you can see all of them is pretty much like, well, if I play the quarterback, maybe I'll do it. Like if I play 2, I'll play Waddle. If I go with a Burrow stack, I'll play Higgins. If I play Brady, I'll go with Evans. But I don't think any of me rostered much on their own. I think I really like T. Higgins this week, 7,300. I don't think anybody's going to be on the Bengals. You mentioned nobody's going to be on Burrow. I think everybody's kind of, watch that Monday night game. It was a standalone game. It's going to be rough, but he seems fully priced. But if I had to go one here, I'd probably go Higgins at 7,300. But it's a range that I'm finding myself not really playing a ton. It's just kind of hard to get to. But you mentioned, okay, go good.
No, yeah, I just wanted to just quickly expand on it. I'll relate it to last week with AJ Brown. So I had a couple lineups that finished really high up there. They actually could have won the tournament with Ellinger at quarterback, and he only scored 8 points. And this was because those lineups had AJ Brown. And what happens is no one rosters AJ Brown without Jalen Hurts. And there was a $4,000 price difference between Jalen Hurts and Ellinger last week.
Yep.
So when you play a cheap quarterback like that, I don't know. I guess I'm sort of, I lost my train of thought. But this week with Fields, for instance, and I mentioned Gabe Davis. Well, Josh Allen's $3,200 more. So it kind of, you don't have to roster these guys with their quarterbacks. Like the salary is almost prohibited. You think like, oh, well, if Brown has a huge game, that means Jalen Hurts is going to have a huge game and he's for sure going to be on the winner. Well, it just doesn't work like that with the salaries on these guys. So Gabe Davis or even Stephon Diggs in this case, if you roster Diggs without Allen, like those are things that people don't do in tournaments. So it's just another thing that I'm looking for.
And I think the key point on that is you mentioned that you think Hurts would be on the winning team, but that guy's playing AJ Brown, but so are you. But not only that, you're then turning, say, Romeo Doubs into Justin Jefferson. Like you are right. You're taking that. The guy might have Hurts and AJ Brown, and that's great. But you have AJ Brown also. But then you're also having another spot where you can really upgrade.
I'm so glad you.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, you went down to Ellinger. It not only got you AJ Brown with Hurts, it got you AJ Brown, and then it gets you someone else. So the other guy has to
Derrick
go off.
Henry.
Yeah, exactly. Derrick Henry was a prime example.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
that's what I wanted to. You hit it on the head. It got me AJ Brown and it got me Derrick Henry. Whereas you can't have Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Derrick Henry. Also on that same lineup, I also had Kamara at 7,100 and Pollard at 6,300. So those 3 running backs just absolutely smashed. AJ Brown smashed. It didn't matter that Ellinger scored 8 points. I had a couple other guys bust or actually could have won the tournament with 8 points from quarterback, which is just crazy.
That as well. Wild that Ellinger, Lawrence, and Justin Fields are all pretty much the same price this week now too. It's the playing Sam Ellinger for the cheap price went away pretty fast. When you move him up to 5,000, you've got some interesting guys that are right there. It's kind of not as sexy pretty quickly. But Mid-range 6,000s. There are some receivers in here I really like. I'm going to go first on this one. I love Chris Godwin this week. Mentioned earlier, 6,200. He had 11 targets last week. Godwin, he just getting a lot of targets, double-digit targets the last 3 weeks. But slot receivers, really good against the Rams. He has not scored yet. Again, I kind of the same. I love guys who haven't scored. We talked about last week with Alvin Kamara hadn't scored. We're like, it's happening. He had 3 touchdowns last week. So it's just, I think Godwin gets to the end zone this week, like him at 6,200. If I'm going to play a Bengals receiver, I think it's actually going to be Tyler Boyd for $1,000 less than Higgins. He used 5 targets last week, 3 for 38 and a touchdown. Carolina, another team has struggled against slot receivers too. So I really like the matchup here for Boyd. I just think $1,000 cheaper than Higgins. I'm going to get there. And also I'm taking them all, but I like Amon-Ra St. Brown also 1,600. I always like St. Brown. His price dropped. He was 7,100 last week. 10 more targets. That was the first week that he looked healthy in a while. He had he'd kind of been in and out of games. He had the concussion thing where he didn't have it, but he had some signs of it. He had the ankle injury. But whenever he's been healthy, he's had a lot of targets. I think he's played 4 games fully, 43 targets in those games. Nothing deep, but again, another spot where Green Bay is weaker against slot receivers. So kind of a slot receiver theme in this range. But St. Brown, Boyd, and Godwin, I'm going to be mixing and matching them on a bunch of teams. I really like all 3 of them. Godwin being my favorite.
Yep, I like all those guys. Godwin's also my favorite. I'll throw one more guy in. I like DK Metcalf as well. I think it's a better matchup for DK Metcalf than it is for Tyler Lockett. Lockett's fine too. They're both decent price tags, but yeah, I agree with everything you said. And then I also like some Metcalf. Yeah,
so Metcalf 6,400, Lockett 6,100. Lockett had a wild week last week. He had the fumble on the punt that cost him. Then he drops a touchdown, like right in his hands. Then he catches a 30-yard touchdown later. Like, it was such an up and down wild game for Lockett. Could have been huge, could have been quiet. He kind of ended up in between with 63 yards and a touchdown. A lot of targets there, but yeah, Metcalf, maybe another week past the injury. I was shocked he played last week. The dude is a badass. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. We thought he'd be out. People were like, worried he's gonna be out for 4 to 6 weeks. He plays the next week. Kind of the opposite of Michael Thomas in New Orleans, who can't get on the field with his toe injury. But yeah, Metcalf is a stud. I like that too. Any love? You're the Packers guy. Alan Lazard's supposed to be back this week. He's 6,000. Rodgers has to throw somebody. When he plays, targets the last 4 weeks have been 8, 8, 9, and 7. He's just not overly exciting ceiling-wise, but he does seem to score a lot when he plays.
Yeah, I just can't. Not over these other guys.
Yeah, I get that's it. Where I felt more.
I'm not excited about these Packers. I don't know. I don't see Rodgers. I know it's the Lions. I don't see Rodgers. Hold on, I'm just checking his game log quick. Up on the season, the most amount of yards he's thrown for is 255. I'm not saying. I mean, that's crazy with Aaron Rodgers.
Is that right? Amazing? We're in week 9, and Rodgers has thrown for over 260 yards.
Right, wow. And the Packers have been trailing in most of those games.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just crazy. So, I mean, I just can't do it.
In the 5,000s, you mentioned DJ Moore earlier. We're talking about the player props. Another big week last week with the late touchdown, 6 for 152 and a touchdown, 11 targets. They've been feeding him the last couple weeks. The Cincy secondary is pretty banged up. So we talked about him already. Who else do you like in the 5,000s here this week? Obviously, we talked about Josh Palmer at 5,100, but who else do you like? There's a lot of choices in here.
Yeah, I don't mind Christian Kirk. You mentioned it when you spoke about the over before, but other than that, if we get this Josh Palmer value, and we mentioned those guys in the low 6K range, I'm not going to mess with these other guys. Like, you can't play everyone, so I'm fine with just playing Palmer. I'm fine with playing some of those low 6K guys we mentioned. I don't know, unless you can sell me on somebody in this range.
I just love Christian Kirk in here. It's my favorite play in this range by a pretty good amount at 5,500. He feels really cheap this week. He had 7 targets last week. I know he's only 3 for 40, but the Raiders are a mess against slot receivers. They've given up 5 touchdown slot receivers on the season, 10.4 yards per target. They are way down the stat list on those. Kirk has 17 targets the last couple weeks. I think they're going to love not playing the Denver D this week. I think Kirk feels like he should be 62, 6,300, or 5,500. I really like to play this week. He's going to be it'd be a pillar for me in a lot of lineups there. I think DJ Moore makes sense too with the way they're feeding him. Still under 6,000. You mentioned Palmer. Rondale Moore is actually in here too. He's 5,200. If you wanted to, play someone that was really good last week. He was 7 for 92 and 8 targets. He had his first touchdown. They played him a lot, which I think is the key. AJ Green played more last week, but they moved Rondale Moore, kind of moved him around, played some outside, some slot. He was heavily involved. Seems like they finally used Moore the way he should be used for the first time last week.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think if you're playing that game, either Kyler or the Geno Smith side, yeah, you should definitely be thinking about Rondale Moore, because everyone's going to play Hopkins. And now that Moore, he's a little bit more expensive, but this is the time to play Moore. You mentioned coming off his best game of the season and not going to be popular. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I just like the way they used him. It finally seems like before there was like, oh, he's like, he had kind of these like trick plays or plays that like behind the line of scrimmage, but it seems like they used him pretty well last week. Terry McLaurin's in this range also against the Vikings. He's 5,900. Had his best game last week. 6 for 113 with Taylor Heineke as his quarterbacks. He had a couple of big plays. He had a 42-yard catch and a 33-yard catch. He's been better against man coverage though, and the Vikings do play a lot of zone, I believe. So maybe not the best setup there, but McLaurin's always kind of boomer bust. He's always if he hits the big play, it's great. But at 5,900, I think his price is workable too. But I'm going Kirk in this range. 5,500 is my favorite.
Yeah, I like that. I think I'm with you.
What about cheap options under 5,000? What are you thinking in terms of maybe saving yourself some salary this week at wide receiver?
Yeah, this range is interesting. So we mentioned Mooney. I kind of like Mooney for 4,700. If you're going to have any part of the Bills, you might want to run it back with Garrett Wilson.
Looked good finally again last week.
Yeah, looked good finally again last week. We know he's got the talent, so I wouldn't mind that. This sort of sound like a broken record with me and the Chargers, but if Keenan Allen's out, I think DeAndre Carter is interesting at 4,300. You should see targets and has some upside. And then a little bit. Here's a little one that might be a little crazier. If you want to take a chance. Hesitant to even bring it up, but I don't mind 4K Khalif Raymond. If you're going to play Aaron Jones. So I was considering Aaron Jones, and, I want a piece of that game. That game against that Green Bay-Detroit game is one of the better games. They don't have Hawkinson anymore. Everyone's going to be on Amon-Ra. I understand. Khalif Raymond's only 4K. He's got 75 receiving yards in back-to-back games. He's the type of guy that has like a 50-yard touchdown in him. Yeah. So I don't mind that in larger field tournaments. I was looking for something maybe a little more off the board. And then, sorry, I guess I'll go one cheaper. I'll mention Terrence Marshall as well. Best game of the season last week, 9 targets, 87 yards. I don't know, a guy that has upside, I think.
Well, you want the good news or the bad news?
The good news.
The good news is we're on the same page. The bad news is I have nobody else to talk about because I had 3 guys highlighted. I had 3 guys highlighted down here. You just talked about all 3 of them.
Who were they?
Wilson, DeAndre Carter, and Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall is the most interesting one. He's 3,900. They are in a setup where they should be trailing Cincinnati. They're underdogs in this game. He had 9 targets last week, and most importantly, he played 74 snaps. If you're looking for someone cheap, I want someone that's on the field all the time. He's played 95% of their dropbacks the last 2 weeks. So, he's heavily involved. This is a guy that people loved coming out of the draft last year. People were drafting him last year. They're feeding DJ Moore. Terrace Marshall's involved. You can see this offense is different without McCaffrey. They have to find different guys. It's a really good game script. He's really cheap. I mean, he has no floor. He could go out there and throw up a 0, but I just love the fact he's playing 95% of the dropbacks. That's huge to me. If I get someone that's cheap, I just want to look up and I'm watching the game on TV. I want them to be on the field. I want them to have a chance to make a play. I want them to have a ball they catch for 10 yards and break. They can't do that if they're only playing half the snap. So I love that he's on the field that much. I think Carter will get some rostership if Keenan doesn't play. He's 4,300. He had 7 targets last week. Had some success in weeks 1 and 2. He was someone that got picked up in season-long leagues. He's just a nice, cheap part of this offense. We're going to be looking for some value here and getting a piece of the Chargers offense against Atlanta, who's not a good defense. For 4,300, I think works well. But I think Marshall's kind of my favorite play down here. 3,900 and someone that's on the field that much. I think, and obviously with some talent, 9 targets last week. I think that's the spot I'm going to go with.
Yeah, I think me too. If I had to pick a favorite, it'd be Marshall. 3,900 is just too cheap for a team that doesn't really have anybody else. And you mentioned on the field for 95% of snaps. One of those 9 targets last week would have been a touchdown if he got the other foot down. So I saw he got a couple red zone targets. So yeah, for 3,900, Marshall's my favorite as well.
Yeah. What about tight end? You mentioned this week there are no tight ends on the slate. We have no Mark Andrews on this slate. We have no George Kittle. We have no Travis Kelce. Zach Ertz is 5,100 most expensive. You mentioned Hawkinson, a new spot is 5,000. What the heck are you doing at tight end this week? I've got 3 guys bolded here. So if you name all 3 again, I'm going to have to quit.
I'm not going to name all 3. I'll take sort of the top range. I guess my 2 favorite tight ends are in the same game. I mentioned Kyle Pitts. I'd probably say is my favorite. The other one would be Gerald Everett. Back to the Chargers and Keenan Allen being out. That's where I'm looking. If Keenan Allen's out and Mike Williams is out, Gerald Everett had 9 targets last week, 7 the week before. He's caught 5 balls in 3 of his last 4. So yeah, I think Everett and Pitts would be my favorite in that range. I don't know. What about a little lower? You like anybody?
First of all, I do like Everett, 4,800. I think that if Allen doesn't play, I mean, he kind of just makes a ton of sense if you want to get some of this game. But 2 guys cheaper that I like. I really like, I hate to say it, it's been someone that we've has burned us for many years, but I really like Evan Ingram this week at 3,300. Yeah. He's just too cheap for how many targets he's getting. The last 4 weeks, you look at tight end, you usually don't get a ton of targets. He's 10, 6, 7, and 6. His worst game in the last 4 weeks is 5 for 40. So that's still 9 points in full point PPR. Like, that's not going to kill you at tight end. He was 455 and a touchdown last week. It was a little touchdown dependent, obviously. If he doesn't score, you're not getting a huge game. But I think he's really actively involved right now. 3,300 is just a really low price for a tight end that's getting that much involvement. And then if you want to punt, you can go down to 2,500 with Brock Wright in Detroit. TJ Hawkinson was traded. 2 weeks ago, Brock Wright was 457, and then in week 17 last year when Hawkinson didn't play, he was 251. It's just one of those things, a cheap punt piece of a game that's one of the higher totals. They should be trailing. They're going to have to throw. They're an underdog. They're high total, good game script. I just think it all kind of works to get a really cheap piece. And, he probably need to score a touchdown to work. But 457 a couple weeks ago, he's 2,500. And they, I think Goff will need someone to throw to without Hawkinson there. Obviously, got Amon-Ra, he's got Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds, whoever it may be. But give me Brock Wright at 2,500 as a play that I think you can slide in and maybe get 7, 8, 9 points out of.
Okay, well, we're on the same page again. First, I have Evan Ingram in my cash game lineup at the moment. I think that's probably where you want to look the cheapest, at least as of now. If Darren Waller is out again, Foster Moreau will be it's hard to say chalk, but in cash games, he'd be the most popular if Darren Waller was out again. So just keep an eye on that. And then I say we're on the same page because I was going to mention a 2,500 guy as well, who also happens to play for the Lions.
You're going to go with the other one, huh?
Mitchell. I'm going to go with James Mitchell, this 5th round pick. And really, Brock Wright, I would say, is the safer, smarter player, whatever you want to call it. Really, I'm mentioning Mitchell because I click on him and I see this note, 5th round rookie, was a big play threat back in college, averaged more than 17 yards per catch. So, I mean, they don't have anybody, and it only takes one. Sorry, I said they don't have anybody. They don't have Hawkinson anymore.
Right.
So, all it takes is one, like you mentioned. 2,500, I don't know, could do worse.
Damn, Mitchell, you're right. Mitchell at Virginia Tech, 17.2 and 16.7 yards per catch over his first 2 college seasons. Then he got hurt. He had a knee injury after that. Wow. He had 5 rushing touchdowns at Virginia Tech also. He played quarterback in high school.
Yeah, I just Googled his name, and it's, there's articles about it's James Mitchell's time to step up, like all this sort of stuff. So, why not?
One of them's probably going to work out pretty well at 1,200. Good luck figuring out which one. I probably go.
The guy you mentioned is the safer play.
Yeah.
I mean, I should. Yeah.
Gotcha. It's interesting. We have a lot of choices there also, which is good. Defense. We got to play one. I always say that. What are you doing at defense this week? If you've either we want to spend some money, save some money. Where do you find yourself kind of moving towards on defense this week?
Man, I don't have much this week. I don't have much. So I think for cash games, people are going to go all the way down to the Panthers.
Yeah.
Just against the Bengals. Yeah, people like to play these min-price defenses, and we've seen that targeting Joe Burrow and the Bengals is okay. So I think, Carolina, if you're going to pay all the way down, I guess in the mid-range, I don't mind Tampa at home against the Rams, but I don't know. Like, maybe you can give me something better.
I had 3, and you named 2 of them, so we definitely are on the same page here. I mean, I don't know if I'll get all the way down to Carolina, but the Bengals have allowed 3+ sacks in 4 straight games. Like, that offensive line is still struggling. Tampa makes sense. It's always weird to go against the Rams, but their offensive line is kind of a mess. It's a little bit better than it was, a little more healthy, but I think that works. My favorite play is 2,700, actually, with Indianapolis. The Jets sacked New England 6 times last week. I like targeting the New England defense. Mac Jones had a terrible pick 6. They got called back. Otherwise, the Jets D would have been really good. The Colts have multiple sacks in 5 straight games. We mentioned earlier that Shaq Leonard is back. I really like the Indy defense this week against New England. I know they're underdogs. We never like that with the defense. At 2,700, I think they get after the quarterback. I think Mac can definitely make some mistakes. So Indy's probably my favorite D. If you could pay up, Buffalo against Zach Wilson at 4,200 probably works really well. I don't think I'll be able to get that high. So give me Indy at 2,700, and then Tampa behind that.
Yep, I can definitely get on board with Indy against Mac Jones.
I think I'm at 27. I'm just gonna throw them in a lineups and kind of call it a day. I think that they're enough of my favorite play, and then maybe I'll play a little bit of Tampa, but I think I'm probably just gonna end up with Indy on most of my teams.
I like that.
Anybody else you want to talk about? Only 10 games on the slate, but a really interesting and fun slate, just based on the fact of how games are kind of it's so spread out, and not a couple games that everybody's going to play, which we've had the last few weeks. So any other thoughts on the week 9 slate here?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think we covered it. Just as you mentioned, really interesting slate here, different than ones we've had. And one lends itself to taking some chances more so than these other ones in the past that have all this chalk that you can't fade. So that's what I say, and that's what I'm going to be telling myself. Try to take a few more chances.
I like it. Someone in the chat mentioned, Drake London is really cheap. We didn't talk about him. We did talk about Kyle Pitts. I just don't. Mm-hmm. I don't love this Atlanta passing game. They're just so willing to run the ball. London has 10 targets total last week. I love him as a player. I just think with the low targets right now, he's been under 40 yards 4 weeks in a row. I think I need him to show something before I get back to playing. Played him earlier in the year. He did pretty well, but at 40 plus yards in 5 straight weeks, I think that's enough for me to stay off for right now.
Yep, I think I agree.
Cool. Thanks everybody for weighing in. We do like when people have questions in the chat. We really appreciate that. Appreciate everybody listening from the audio version. Also, we want to thank No House Advantage for their sponsorship of the podcast. We really appreciate that. If you want to follow Ryan on Twitter, he's at Ryan Belongia. Last name is Belongia. I am at Scott Jenstad. Jenstad is Jenstad. We can talk other football there. Obviously, as injury news comes out, morph some lineups. We mentioned a lot of if this guy sits, play this guy kind of stuff, and that'll clarify itself over these next couple of days. But we want to thank everybody for listening to the Week 9 podcast. Back at you next Friday morning with Week 10. Hope everybody has a good week. Take care and good luck.
Good luck, everybody. Thanks, Scott.